and Amboli is Tamil. So we already have Tamil, so it's a very easy job if you start going from the known to the unknown. We already know enough. We call our mother Amma. Our own word is Mata or Mava. For the father we said Pia, Pitru, but we say Appa or Tata. Appa is Tamil. Mama is Tamil. Our own word is, it's very embarrassing word called Mail. So in Vesak cards you get this Mailanu. Mailanu means uncle. So we didn't want to say that word, so we just dropped that for
for other reasons.
Other reasons, and call him Mama. So you already have Tamil. Our vegetables like Bandaka and Vattaka, Sadika, all Tamil, or Murunga. So now it's easy to go from there. So go from the known to the unknown, kids just pick it up.
So there's definitely a shared heritage, and there are so many reasons that we should enforce this and really encourage the communities to do it. But talking about the practical ground realities and the challenges, like as we're trying to implement it, trying to encourage this, what have two of you, so maybe both can comment on this, what are the challenges that we need to realize and take head on?
First, you need teachers. Now to do this, a school or we need teachers of Sinhala, so it's called second language teaching. Sinhala for Tamil, Tamil for Sinhalese. So first we need a good set of teachers, well trained, who will make learning interesting. Sometimes a teacher can make everything very boring depending on the teacher. We have our own personal experience at school. So if the good teachers are there, they learn it, kids learn it. But if you come up to a level of, say, officials working in departments, now they have to be taught, and they have to offer, they are given various inducements like increments in salary or other promotions. So they will, but then I think it's very necessary to have good teachers. Then what can they use? They have to have what you call class materials. The lessons have to be done in a nice way. So there's so much work, there's already work done, but now I think the task force has the power to coordinate so that we have not much wastage. So it can be done.
On that score, I would stress the whole question, I mean, absolutely important, the whole resource question in terms of teachers. But I will also stress the point about attitude and commitment, because, after all, as we all know, we've had an official language commission in the country since 1990, and we're still having to deal with, I mean, we at CPA, at the Center for Policy Alternatives, we did this program on trilingualism, currently doing it in the eastern province as well as certain districts in the north. And what we're finding is the old story. I mean, it's the one about, a Tamil person goes to a police station, there's no one in the police station who speaks Tamil, so at the end of the day they're signing a statement that they've made in Sinhala, they don't understand it. The state communicates to the citizen not in the citizen's mother tongue, and therefore there is a sense of alienation. Now, we've had some success in terms of ensuring that basic services, the provision of basic services or basic information with regard to travel, for example, bus routes, train stations, that kind of thing. And also we've written to the Consumer Protection Authority with regard to drugs, for example. The information on most of the drugs, on the packets and bottles, is in English. So both the Sinhalese and Tamil consumers of the drugs don't quite know what they're consuming at the end of the day. So there is, it is also about the question of commitment and approach, because I've always thought that given the adverse effects of language in terms of the conflict that we've had as well, that at one level it's also surely a fairly basic, fundamental, and one of the most simpler things to do in terms of affecting reconciliation.
Well, on that note, we're going for a short commercial break. We'll be talking to Professor Dissanayake and to Dr. Savaramuthu shortly after this break, so do stay with us.
Welcome back. We're in conversation with Dr. Savaramuthu and Professor Dissanayake. We're talking about language policy and the journey ahead, and the conversation continues. We've talked about some of the challenges, we talked about the shared heritage, we talked about a change in attitude, and also, Dr. Sarah, you mentioned certain advocacies carried out by the CPA as well, trying to see basic, signs and police stations having people who are trilingual. But all these things are there, but mainly one of my questions right now is, when we're talking about some of the initiatives that the government has been raising, that has got a lot of good propaganda and really well done. Gama Naguma, Maga Naguma, Divi Naguma, all these, when you go to the rural areas, these have had an impact. and the rural communities are appreciative of what's going on. But these very concepts are not directly translated into Tamil. The concept of what he wants to achieve and how it's going to go. So even when it comes to policy, how do you see language, the trilingualism being implemented so that people feel that they also can be a part of the process?
So at the moment, the government did a lot of things to develop the infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings and all this. Very good. I saw last night that in Pasikuda they are building a lot of hotels. Well and good. But once you go and start living there, how do we communicate with others? If you go to, if I live in Pasikuda, if I just walk a few miles to the interior, if I meet a group of Tamils, young people, or how could I communicate with them? So we still have the main problem to teach Sri Lankans to use the language of the other ethnic group. So it's very important. So we already have, I think, then as a linguist, I think learning should begin as early as possible. In linguistic matters, if I am asked to learn French or German now, it's difficult because I already have a set of patterns in my head already. You have patterns in first language. So as you grow up, it's difficult to replace the old ones with new ones. But as children, we pick up very fast. I think in Colombo, middle class families, they speak English as their mother tongue now. I have come a lot of people, they're much better in English than in Sinhala or Tamil. So if you start early, it's very good. So I think these should come to the school. That in the school, we have to make it mandatory, I think. Otherwise, you are given a choice, they may not even pick it up. Say in Matara, why should somebody bother to learn Tamil? Or in Batiklo, why should somebody bother to learn Sinhala? But in the school, I think, as early as possible, make it mandatory so that they'll start learning Tamil. And then let the teacher use Tamil or Sinhala in the class to play, with toddlers, to play, name things. Don't forget about the grammar to begin with. Just name things. What do you call this, like that, Pustakam, like that. This is a book called Pustakam or pencil or whatever it is. So I think start with things that interest them. Name, how to write the name of your friend, Lakshmi or Kumar. How to write Kumar in Tamil, in Sinhala, like that. I think if you start early, it will bear fruit, I think.
But see, coming back to the question of getting people involved, as Prashant said, these programs that are being implemented in the village level are of great importance because, as you said, it does create those strides of development that we need. But let's say if you are sort of implementing Gamanagama in Batiklo or Trincomalee, if people don't identify what does Gamanagama mean, how can they get involved? How do how does the government sort of create this development drives or certain policies that they are, creating with the purpose of involving people, getting people involved?
No, that's the point. As Professor Disanayake said earlier, the question of communication. Now, if you want support, if you want someone to be a stakeholder in an enterprise, you have to be able to communicate to them and them in response to you. So I think, when we're talking about public policy in particular, we need to ask ourselves, why are we talking about trilingualism? What is it that we want to achieve through it? And keep that very much as a focus. I think the government has identified 29, and they're probably going to identify another 43 DS divisions which are going to be treated as bilingual. But I think it's important for them to consider what criteria they use with regard to it, because even if you have a small but significant community that speaks another language within a particular division, it's important that they nevertheless don't feel like outsiders. So I would say, if you have even 1% of your population in a division, you really need to, look at what services are being provided, in what language is the state responding to you, talking to you, and indeed also the private sector, very importantly, that they are brought in on this. Because end of the day, we are talking about this because we want to create, there are political objectives of unity, of harmony, of reconciliation, etc., and we mustn't lose focus on that.
I think it's Mandela who once said, if you want to speak to a person to understand. You can speak another language, they can, but if you want to speak to somebody's heart, you need to speak their mother tongue, and it's so important if you want to inspire the masses to really join in this cause. Professor Disanayake is speaking also on this whole concept that's coming about language societies. That's one of the proposals that has been put out there, and for some of our viewers who may not understand what that's all about, would you enlighten us on this and give us some insight?
Well, I said in certain villages or in regions, there are both Tamils and Muslims living together. So they have to be brought together.